Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second Legacy Circle Fireside Chat. My name is Jess Blosfeld, and I work with our Legacy Circle members in the central region of the United States. Later in the program, you will also see another familiar face, my colleague Cindy Barrington, who covers the West Coast. Now, before I begin, I'd like to go over some logistics for the program. First, we will have time for questions following the presentation today. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, please use the Google form found below the video player in your web browser. Our team behind the scenes will be monitoring your submissions throughout the presentation, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can during the Q&A. If you'd like to maximize the size of your video screen, you can hover your mouse over the video player and click on the expand icon at the far right of the toolbar on the bottom. To exit out of full screen mode, which you may want to do to submit a question, you can minimize your video by pressing the escape key on your keyboard. Finally, I wanted to note that we are recording today's webinar so that we can share it on the WWF website. Now for today's topic. In the face of rapidly growing threats to biodiversity, there is a greater sense of urgency for developing and scaling up conservation capacities. More specifically, evidence across the globe continues to demonstrate that conservation success depends on supporting committed individuals and institutions who are the driving force in addressing threats to the natural world. Over the last 27 years, WWF's Russell E. Train Education for Nature program has spearheaded effective and long-term solutions across Africa, Asia, and Latin America by providing financial support for education, research, and professional growth, all of which are critical to fueling the current and future generations of conservation leaders. To date, we are proud to say that the program has supported over 2,100 individuals, 650 institutions, and countless diverse networks. Passing down a love for nature and educating future generations is paramount to WWF's continued success. There are no other families who have exemplified this and impacted our work more than the Train family. It is now my pleasure to introduce Bodie Train, son of Russ and Aline Train, and an esteemed member of our National Council. Bodie has 35 years of experience in investment management and is currently a principal at Douglas Winthrop Advisors. He began his career practicing law at the DC-based firm Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman, where he focused on corporate finance. He also spent 2 years as the Deputy Assistant Administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency with responsibility for toxic waste management and cleanup. Bodie serves as an advisor for the Civil Courage Prize, as a member of the board of the Waterfowl Research Foundation, and previously served on the boards of the Nature Conservancy, Hospice Care of the District of Columbia, the African Wildlife Foundation, and the Ocean Foundation. He received his bachelor's degree in economics from Trinity College and his law degree from Georgetown University, where he also served as editor of the Tax Lawyer. And now, Bodie will share more on his family's journey, their legacy, and then introduce our keynote speaker, Nelly Kadagi. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to another virtual Legacy Circle Fireside Chat. Although with temperatures hovering near 100 degrees here in Washington, perhaps we don't need that fire. My name is Bodie Train, and I've been involved with WWF nearly my entire life. I had no choice, as my dad, Russ Train, founded WWF with my mother, Aline, an equal part of that endeavor. At that time, Dad was a federal judge who also happened to have a strong interest in the outdoors and a passion for the mysteries of Africa. A walk in the woods with Dad was never just a walk. It was an exploration of the flora and fauna. We were never without our binoculars and our field guides. As a tax lawyer, Dad had an intuitive grasp of complex systems, and he early understood the interconnectedness and mutual dependencies of all life shares with the rest of our planet. Having grown up during the Depression, fought in World War II, and been witness to the incredible restructuring of the global economy taking place the last half of the 20th century, Dad also understood the importance of education and human infrastructure He always said that life could be hard, that it is possible to lose all your possessions in a moment, but he believed that it was much harder to confiscate a well-educated mind. His first forays into the world of conservation involved raising money to educate an African civil service to manage the great natural resources of East Africa as the European powers were pulling out of the continent. As he approached his retirement, Dad's career in conservation came full circle. When he stepped down as chair of WWF's board, the organization decided to honor him by creating the Russell E. Train Education for Nature program. It was based on his belief that the long-term survival of these incredible areas we are all trying to conserve is dependent on the people who live there, and that they must be afforded the opportunity to learn the skills and knowledge they needed to address the many challenges in their home countries. While Mom and Dad were generous to the Education Fund for Nature during their lives, they believed in this vision and this program so much that they left a substantial legacy gift of their own to the program in their estate plans. My sisters and I are thrilled, and we know our parents would be so gratified with how this program continues to thrive and grow, thanks to the generosity of so many folks like you. Your legacy gift to World Wildlife Fund helps save a living planet for future generations. By leaving a legacy to WWF, you will continue to help reduce the most pressing threats to the diversity of life on Earth for the long run. WWF and my entire family are grateful to you for your thoughtful foresight. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Nelly Kadagi, the Director of Conservation Leadership and the Education for Nature program. In addition to leading the EFN program, Dr. Kadagi is also an EFN alumna. She received a Russell E. Train Fellowship in 2015 that supported her PhD studies while at the University of Florida. She worked as a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Denver. Along with her postdoctoral work, Dr. Kadagi also served as the Director of Research for the African Billfish Foundation. She has earned many fellowships and awards, and we are delighted to have her speak to us today. Welcome, Dr. Nelly Kadagi.
Thank you, Rowdy, for the insightful opening remarks about your parents, Russ and Eileen Train, the Education for Nature program, and for my introduction. To everyone that's tuned in, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on your time zone. Thank you so much for making time to come to this legacy Circle Fireside chat. Building on Bowdy's words on whether we need a fire for this chat in what seems to be high temperatures of 90+ degrees Fahrenheit, I think we do, even if it's an imaginary one, as a fire may symbolize a reflection, a reimagining, rethinking, and purposing of this incredible foundation laid by Russ and Eileen, which resonates with today's theme, continuing the legacy. I am delighted for this amazing opportunity to take a deep dive into one of WWF's long-standing critical programs, of which I am privileged to be connected to it as an alumni and serving as a director. It's also an honor to walk through today's theme, focusing on advancing the legacy of our founders by highlighting our successes and opportunities within our conservation capacity development initiative. Even more special is that we bring together our brilliant EFN alumni to hear about their journey and experiences within the conservation space and discuss their efforts in expanding the pipeline of conservation leaders. Next slide, please. To get us started, we reflect on the history of the Education for Nature program. The program was established in 1994 in honor of the Russell E. Train, founder and president of WWF. As we heard from Bowdy, Russ and Eileen share this significant commitment to supporting the growth of local conservation leadership, institutions, and networks around the globe, with the belief that accelerating conservation outcomes will only happen when we put ownership of natural resources in the hands of local communities and leaders. And as for the last 27 years, the WWF Education for Nature program have successfully worked to advance this vision through our various signature initiatives. Next slide, please. So how do we continue to achieve this legacy, this vision? Over the last 2+ decades, we've run several initiatives, including the Russell E. Train Fellowship, which supports capacity development for critical conservation issues and advancement of higher education and evidence-based conservation science. The Train Legacy Scholarships, which are awarded to outstanding institutions and partners in Asia, Latin America, and Africa to develop in-country education, knowledge, and skills platforms. We also have our Reforestation Grant Program, one of our signature initiatives for the last 11 years, which supports restoration of deforested and degraded ecosystems. Through this program, we have had impressive conservation outcomes in places of high biodiversity, such as in the Amazon, the Congo Basin, and in Madagascar, just to mention a few. We also have the short-term grants, which are awarded to support and nurture time-sensitive and critical capacity needs at country and regional level. And lastly, our alumni grants, which aim to maintain our pipeline of conservation leaders and enhance the continuation of intergenerational skills, knowledge, and capacity sharing across networks. Overall, the program is located at this complex yet important nexus of capacity development and sharing for conservation science, thought leadership, and enhancing efforts of communities to achieve sustainable stewardship of natural resources. Next slide, please. And so when we look at our numbers in a nutshell, 70% of our funding has been directed to individuals, while the remaining 30% goes to institutions. Gender-wise, we have supported equal proportions of women and men, with this effort targeting individuals and systems in close to 80 countries across the globe. And to date, we have over 650 institutions and 2,100 individuals that have been supported upholding Ras and Island's vision. Next slide. The impact of our fellows, scholars, and alumni work cuts across various WWF goals and priority areas, with most of our alumni working at the intersection and interconnectedness of these issues. For example, implications of climate change on forests and how climate change connects to issues that we continue to see when we look at forest degradation and ecosystem loss. Climate change and how it connects to food and nutrition security. How do we tackle human conflict and what it takes for humans and nature to exist together, among other topics. What's even more important and a key point to emphasize is the value of our alumni and fellows' contributions through working with local and indigenous communities at grassroots to ensure their well-being, development of leadership, and conservation that embraces indigenous and traditional interventions and knowledge. And to really drive this point home in the significance of this vision is the focus on inclusive science. Our contribution to ensuring that conservation interventions are backed up by science are seen in the work of our ESN scholars, who continue to provide leadership in the way that science informs conservation priorities and actions in their various countries and globally. Next slide, please. Now, let me take a step back from the numbers and broad impact and bring you to my story as one of the Education for Nature alumni. I must admit that this is the difficult part of this conversation because I get to talk about myself. But when I reflect on Ras and Island's vision of what conservation leadership means and my trajectory, It magnifies why we need to contribute to the much needed discourse about supporting the next generation of conservation leaders and ensuring continuity in the pipeline. Being awarded the Russell E. Train Education for Nature Fellowship made it possible for me to get started on one of my long distance dreams of getting a PhD, which could give me much credibility to be a scientist and conduct research that addresses critical issues, particularly on the implication of fishing on large pelagic fish species. Funding from the program gave me that opportunity to reach out to fishermen and fisherwomen in villages across the Indian Ocean and coastal East Africa. I became a fisherwoman who did not fish, but focused on finding solutions to our declining fish populations. But there was more work to do to ensure that I'm not the only one or among the few that did this work. Again, with support from the Education for Nature program, I was able to actively engage diverse audiences, especially communities, young people, emerging leaders in my home country of Kenya and across the Western Indian Ocean region. Even in doing this, I realized that we still need backup from many stakeholders on mapping the future of conservation leaders. For example, adapting to the growing needs and finding the resources to support this work. And what a better way to do this than to challenge myself to come to the front line and provide collaborative leadership for the next generation of conservation leaders. Now, I'm here as the director of the Education for Nature program. Next slide, please. I am not the only one. I welcome you to travel with me in this moment to Asia, Africa, and Latin America, across the globe, where our alumni and fellows are doing incredible work. Like in the Galapagos, where several years we have supported female scientists to tackle conservation challenges. This amazing group of women are now connecting and collaborating to grow their work and network. In Guyana, where one of our current fellows is leading his work on recovery of fish diversity in collaboration with another alumni from the program. This demonstrates the power of connecting, building the momentum of capacity sharing, and continuing to support brilliant ideas to fruition. And lastly, in Kenya, in coastal East Africa, where one of our PhD fellows is making a significant contribution to the management of shared fisheries resources through her incredible work exploring the socioeconomic and cultural dynamics of fisheries. This is just a tip of the iceberg on the contribution of our EFN alumni network. Next slide, please. When we imagine for a second, I would like to say that it takes collective effort to raise conservation leaders and scientists. Where I come from, we say it takes a village. In the same way, I look at the Education for Nature program and the legacy of Russ and Eileen and many people who support and steer this work forward. To break it down further, we have individuals who want to see a better world by investing into this work so that we achieve a world with the right skills, knowledge, and capacities in places where we need it the most, and to respond to rapidly growing threats to biodiversity. And then we have the individuals, our Education for Nature alumni and scholars who go out of their way to do amazing and challenging work for our planet. And that is the village I am talking about when we reflect and reimagine on continuing the legacy of Russ and Eileen Train. Thank you again. And for this next session, I'm pleased to be joined by our program alumni, and let me introduce them. I'll start with Dr. Caroline Chebet-Mweno. Dr. Mweno is currently a wildlife ecologist at the Born Free Foundation in Meru Conservancy in Kenya. Through her current research, she tries to understand how species interactions can inform wildlife conservation and management. Caroline's work as an ecologist satisfies her task to constantly pursue new questions and be outdoors. Her professional and research interests span a broad range of topics focusing on the ecology of African savanna with emphasis on predator-prey interactions, human-wildlife coexistence, and the advancement of human livelihoods and quality of life through education. Her research coalesces around applied research, basic questions in ecology, and bridging the natural social science gap. Welcome, Dr. Mweno.
Thank you, Nelly.
The next one is Jamal Davis, who is a conservationist and research biologist working to conserve the endangered antennae manatees of Belize. He's currently a program coordinator and research biologist with the Clearwater Marine Aquarium Research Institute in Belize. He is an alumnus of the Russell E. Train Education for Nature program, a 2018 Nat Geo Photo Arc Age Fellow, and a current National Geographic Explorer. For his efforts to save the manatees, Jamal was named an Oceana Ocean Hero, a Belize National Hero, a World Wildlife Fund Planet Hero, and a Paul Harris Fellow. He's also an alumnus of the Conservation Leadership Program and the Caribbean Emerging Wildlife Leader. Jamal's work has also been featured in the Wildlife Magazine and on the Dodo website. Welcome, Jamal.
Thank you, Nelly.
And the last of our panelists is Sandiwe Mwitwa, who is a wildlife biologist working with the Zambian Carnivore Program in Eastern Zambia. As project manager for ZCP's Luanga site, he coordinates the organization's research, conservation, and outreach activities in Southern Luanga National Park and the adjoining game management areas. Her research areas of interest include studying population dynamics of large carnivores and threats to their persistence, as well as understanding the nature and extent of human carnivore conflict in Luangwa Valley. Sandiwe is the National Geographic Explorer and an alumni of the Obama Foundation Leaders Africa program. I am very excited to have all of you today. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, to get us started, I've been reflecting on your profiles, which are very amazing, and that inspires me for this first question. When did your interest in wildlife conservation begin? I'm going to start with you, Sandiwe.
Thank you very much. My interest in wildlife conservation began mainly through storytelling in various forms. So word of mouth by my mother, just from her interactions with wildlife around her home village. That was very fascinating to me. And then also from books and television and different, forms of media that fueled the interest in wildlife conservation. So when I got to finally live in an area that had wildlife and I got to experience living with nature firsthand, that's pretty much what cemented my interest in wildlife conservation.
Thanks, Sandiwe. Caroline.
Well, thank you very much, Nelly. I think my experience is a little bit different. I was very fortunate enough to live close to a national reserve in the Rift Valley part of Kenya. And as a young girl, I participated in various activities, just herding my family's livestock, which actually got me in trouble most of the time because I was always fascinated with the spectacular landscape, and I always forgot the main responsibility that I was going to do going out there in the field. So I believe that the development of the interest in nature actually began at a very early stage. And I remember spending a lot of hours listening to various stories about wildlife, and even some stories that some species I don't think that existed before, the big animals. So listening to my grandparents tell these exciting stories, and it made me think, do these species really exist? And of course, coming from a pastoral community, the aspect of human-wildlife conflict really began at a very early stage. And I think trying to find answers, because my father was very furious about the loss on livestock. And like me, I was very fascinated with the sheer power of the mighty lion, and the presence of just the lions awed me. So basically, that is where I felt that I would start from. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. Jamal.
Well, for me, it's a journey that started from age 11. I grew up in a very small village outside of Belize named Gills Point, Manatee. Ironically known for the Manatee's presence there. So as a kid, I've always known about Manatees. Seeing Manatees wasn't something new to me, it's just the norm. But at 11 years old, I saw this weird looking boat drive by, says Manatee Research, and it has the engine in the front and a weird tower, and like a kid who sees a cool car, I become interested in the boat. Before I know it, we started asking questions what they were doing, and we understood that they were doing Manatee Research. My cousins and I would play Manatee Rescue on the lawn and fight to see who gets to drive the cool boat or who gets to be the cool doctor with a stethoscope. But my passion and my interest in Manatees had outgrown my grandma's lawn. So I strolled on to the dock where they live, and I approached the guy who is actually my boss still today, Dr. James Body Powell. At 11 years old, I said, I want to come out with you guys. He looked at me, shrugged for a second, and said, kid, you're too small. I'm pretty sure it was my I'm about to cry face that I made him change his mind and say, kid, let's go. Which had some consequences because I didn't get my grandma's permission. But that's for another story. But being out there with these world-renowned scientists taught me so much about Manatees, things that I never knew. I've just always seen Manatees from my grandma's lawn. But seeing them doing the research, understanding that they're endangered, seeing the boat strike, seeing the risk, seeing the problems animals are facing, made me feel like, why can't I be the person to save the species? Even though I was just 11 years old, I wanted to be a part of change. I wanted to conserve a species. I wanted to save my friends in my backyard. I wanted to do something, and I felt, you know what? I've since committed myself. Since 11 years old, I volunteered until I was eventually hired, since they could not have gotten rid of me. I'm living my passion. This is my dream. This is my journey. I wouldn't want to do anything else in the world.
Thank you, Jamal. And I must say, listening to your stories, and usually it's very encouraging to hear those memorable stories that made someone say, "Aha, this is what I would like to do." And that is a good segue to this next session, and especially thinking about what the world has gone through in the last 1 year with COVID-19. And we've read different articles and researches showing that COVID-19 did have an impact on our biodiversity in different ways. And so the question to you all is, what challenges are you facing in wildlife conservation in a COVID-19 world? Any of you can jump on. Otherwise, I will start being biased.
I'll go first. COVID-19 has been a disaster in many sorts of ways for mainly human livelihood. We've seen die off of millions of people around the world. We've seen businesses collapse. But it has been a positive in a sense for Manatees and many wildlife, as people are forced to be quarantined, forced to be at home, forced to be restricted by movements due to regulations. So wildlife has gone back to a sense of what they've used to before human impact, before human invaded on their space, their life, their environment. But what I'm concerned about is that the false sense of security, the false sense of safety that has been that has been brought upon them by COVID-19, in the sense of Manantes, for instance, feeling safe because they haven't seen a boat in months, almost a year. But as COVID-19 starts to become a little more less of an impact, things are slowly going back into this norm, and I believe that it can have a significant impact on wildlife as the world starts to evolve and the wheels start turning again and people start to go back to their normal activities. Wildlife may not have an opportunity to adapt that fast, may not have an opportunity to make the necessary change and adjustment to the world as it evolves after COVID-19. But it also impacted us in regards to our awareness effort. As conservationists, as scientists and researchers, it's important to collect data, but it's most important for us to transfer that data in the most simple form so that the community members, the layperson, legislators are able to understand that data and to make a sound decision or to make some changes to protect environment or wildlife. But with the restriction limiting people interaction over the year and a half or so, we have not been able to do as much awareness. We've not been able to share that knowledge, share the information. We've not been able to try and inspire people to want to be a part of change. So I think it really dampened and limited our ability to share the story, to tell the message. We've been stuck to computer screens and virtual presentations and meetings. But it's nothing like standing in front of a person, inspiring them, trying to convince them why they should be a part of conservation, why they should be a part of change. So it has its pros and cons, but in all sense, it's an evolving world, and we as conservationists have to be able to evolve and to stay ahead of it so we can do our job as well.
I can go.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So just to build on what Jamada said, looking at the Kenyan perspective, so our global GDP depends on tourism. So these has heavily impacted on mostly various conservation areas. Taking the Kenya's Masai Mara, which is the biggest conservation area in Kenya. So most of the communities in this particular area rely on tourism, and we have the conservancy model operating in this particular area. So most of these conservancy members rely on leases, and the income they receive is mostly from the tourism partners that pay in money. So we've seen a lot of fences being erected in this particular system because communities are feeling that they're not getting any income anymore. So with the fences, this has actually impacted a lot on migratory corridors for wildlife, which is a big one. But of course, also looking at from the staffing perspective of the patrolling efforts within the conservation areas, this has really greatly been impacted. Looking at our areas of operation, for example, within Born Free Foundation. So within the Meru Conservation Area, we are seeing a lot of wire snares being put out by communities in that, in terms of just looking at sources of livelihoods, because most of the communities were heavily reliant on tourism revenues. So for them to survive, then they have to get something that to sustain their day-to-day feeding and all that. So we've seen an increase on the snaring numbers within the conservation areas, which is really quite alarming because, of course, with minimized patrolling efforts, given the limited funding that is available. But of course, also looking at the positive side, as Jamala said, I guess in Kenya this year, I think we last experienced the best migration. The wildlife was just migrating from the Serengeti Mara ecosystem with minimum interference from tourism. And of course, because we are having a lot of Zoom meetings, minimum travels, and I think this has really also helped in reducing the carbon footprint. So Tandiwe, maybe you can build onto that again.
Yeah, I think similar to what both you guys have touched on. I live right outside a tourist town, and tourism activity here ground to a halt, as in many places. But, you know, the picture that we expected in 2020 due to COVID-19 was quite a bit more complex than, you know, we had imagined. We thought that, you know, with the grinding to a halt of tourism, we're going to see snaring incidents shoot through the roof. We're going to see animals dying from snares and things like that. But the good news is it wasn't that much different from the years before. And then from the standpoint of the species that I work on, we didn't have many carnivores reported to be snared, and we didn't treat as many animals as we have in the past, which was quite surprising, but a very welcome surprise. For the first time, I think in 10 plus years, we didn't have a snared lion at all in our ecosystem. Of course, that has changed this year. Our team just treated the first one this past week, but hopefully things don't just degenerate in the worst case scenario that we thought. And I think the other positive part that came out from COVID-19 was the anticipated negative impacts. Actually, I think made collaboration among conservation organizations in this area that much more pronounced. We feared the worst. We're like, okay, let's work closer together and see how we can protect this ecosystem and the wildlife that live in it. And then how best do we support communities that live around the area? So, for example, together with another organization working here called Conservation South Luangwa, we've started an initiative supporting safari guides with some additional income, but then also at the same time enabling community members around the national park to get the opportunity to go inside the park and see animals. And from a data standpoint, we also get these field teams that are there to collect data for us, which is citizen science in action. So COVID-19, the impact has been quite complex. We feared the worst, but luckily things were much better. There's been a few positives here and there. There's things that we hope would have done in 2020, like Jamal was saying, getting out there and talking to people that we've had to scale back on. But yeah, we'll hope for the best in 2021 and see where it takes us.
I just wanted to, Nelly, I just wanted to add an additional thing. We had it's interesting because like you guys both mentioned tourism. Tourism is also the biggest income for Belize, and it had literally gone to a standstill. And one of the things that we've noticed is that before COVID-19, we averaged around maybe 35 to 40 dead manatees a year. Since COVID-19, last year I think we had around 10, and this year we're only at 4. That's a significant decrease in manatee deaths. Unprecedented. We've never recorded those numbers in over the last 10 years. So it shows that these things are definitely correlated, and manatees are definitely breathing a sigh of relief as a result of COVID-19 in their perspective.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think it has been a very good wake-up call as a conservationist. One of the biggest lessons that I've learned is the resilience from the communities and the critical roles that the communities play towards conservation. So basically, in as much as a scientist, we usually come with complex answers and complex solutions, but I've been really amazed to see the local communities coming from around actively engage in conservation. So that has been an amazing moment for me during this particular COVID period.
Great. And I'm going to put a big placeholder on the implications, which again, as I hear you all speak, we are looking at those positives and negatives, which are amounting to complex solutions to this particular problems, of which they range and vary across different scales. Now, in thinking about this other question, I had to give myself an assignment, because when people inspire you, you want to get to know more about them in depth. And so I went to what we would call in the normal language stalking, but I wouldn't really call it stalking, because I really wanted to understand more, how does your work, which is the connecting point here, resonate with Eileen and Gasto Train's vision of continuing this legacy, especially when we put ownership in the hands of local people. And I will borrow this quote from Sandiwe, where in one of her interviews, she says, she wants to connect people back to nature and making the conservation movement a bit more inclusive, a bit more compassionate, even toward those who cause the problem, it works to solve. We do not have the luxury of alienating people. I thought that was powerful and leads me to this question to you, Sandy, and I will open up to others to also jump in. How has COVID-19 shaped your view of conservation, capacity development, and sharing, especially when you think about those people, communities that we cannot leave behind?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think like you've seen and you've already mentioned, capacity development and connecting the local people and enabling them to participate in conservation is absolutely important to me personally and the organization I work for. The COVID-19 pandemic, I think, has highlighted why it is very important to take that extra effort to provide these opportunities for people, why it's important to identify the people that have the passion and have the interest to work in the conservation sector and support them full on. In many places, we've heard about how, different organizations have failed to do their work because people couldn't travel. So if the lead scientist was stuck in America or England, for instance, the project was essentially shut down and no work could go on, be it science work, be it community support work, be it human-wildlife conflict mitigation work, and that sort of stuff, just because there hadn't been that investment in developing local talent. And fortunately, on our side, we were able to operate most of 2019 without any glitches at all the sites that we work in, just because the effort and the work we put into developing talent for in-country scientists had paid off massively. And yeah, coming to the side of alienating people, we work in a field that tends to be very much us versus them. Very much about finger pointing and looking like, we can't work with people that we don't agree with. I think that the conservation field and the conservation sector in general would benefit a lot from, like I say, being a bit more compassionate, walking in people's shoes, and looking at the very positive side of things, saying, problems exist today, but it doesn't mean they're here forever. And I think a lot of organizations and a lot of groups are moving towards that. They're looking at communities more as partners, and they're looking at ways to meaningfully engage these people versus just paper language of saying, oh, we work with communities on ABCD, but it's actually about giving people an actual voice and then hearing from them what would work, and then adjusting our own organizational goals or personal goals based on the feedback that we get. It's the most difficult thing to do. I always say it's much easier, to work with a pride of lions in the middle of nowhere than a group of 5 or 6 people. But I definitely believe that it's the way to go, and we should definitely put effort in that, despite how much work it looks like or how discouraging it can be at times. And I think this year for us, we've had the opportunity to double down on that, and we're seeing improvements and we're seeing results just from the human-wildlife conflict mitigation work that we're doing. People are more open to alternative solutions than, say, just killing the problem animals. They're thinking more about what other solutions can be more beneficial for human-lion coexistence. So it's a lot of work, but we're seeing results.
Thanks, Sandiwe. And I have lots of questions that I want to ask, because as I said, I gave myself this homework because your work is very inspiring, but I'm also cognizant of the fact that we also have our audience who will be wanting to also ask questions. So I have 2 questions left before I open up this session to our audience. Jamal, in my homework, I came through your passion. The question was, what fires Jamal's passion? And you said, waking up knowing that you're speaking for something that can not speak for itself. Just because they can't speak doesn't mean that they don't have something to say. And that brings me to this question when we think about how we continue to develop the pipeline of conservation leaders, not just in our countries, our areas, but also across the globe. How is your work influencing, mentoring, or elevating those around you to address this critical issue?
For me, it's one of the most critical part of my effort. I would not want to be a part of this conservation initiative if I'm not able to share my knowledge. Considering my path to conservation, I like to call it my unusual journey to conservation. Being I'm an anti-conservationist and working in this field. At 11 years old, I used to refer to it as my relationship with Manatee as an ocean between us. It seemed like a pipeline dream, like something that could never happen. But I was fortunate to have had people to offer me the opportunity to mentor me. The least that I can do as an individual like that is to share with other individuals. I spent a lot of time in schools from kindergarten to universities, just trying to share the knowledge. And a big part of my work is not just science and information, it's more inspiration, trying to mold the next generation to become stewards of the environment. We live here, this is our home, we don't have any other place to go. We must all be a part of this and to send a message that conservation is not for conservation is not for conservationists, it's for people. So when you talk about alienating people, there's no space for alienation in conservation. Whether you're a pilot, you're a teacher, or a doctor, you're a carpenter, you're just a layperson, this is a part of your life. It's not I always say conservation is not an occupation. So I don't necessarily consider myself just a conservationist, because conservation is a way of life. It's something that every single person that's living and breathing on this planet need to live by. It's not something that you pick up and put on a table and pick it up next week. It's not an 8 to 5 job. It's not a part-time job. It's literally a lifetime journey. It's something that you must live every single day. So my goal is to really not just to inspire, but to share my knowledge. I do this a lot with volunteers, interns, sharing with them, because it's unfortunate a lot of NGOs and conservation organizations, because they're battling sometimes for the same funding opportunity, they neglect the fact to cooperate or to network or to share knowledge because they want to keep it for themselves. But we're not going to be able to save this planet by doing that. We literally need to share our knowledge, our experience with every single possible person so that we can have more hands on deck. Saving this world is not a one man's job. Most people look at me as the anti-conservationist, the anti-savior, but I always acknowledge the people behind me that are pushing me, that are doing the things that are making the wheels move that people don't get to recognize and see, and to say thank you to those people, because they're the ones that really make it happen. I'm just that voice, and being a voice for something that can't speak for themselves, to me, is one of the most powerful opportunity, and one of the most powerful job or tasks that I've been given in this opportunity, in the sense that it's not just animal. Look at people that can't speak, not being able to explain, not being able to express their feeling. It's something that I visualize, I imagine, to put myself in their position, to think if I was not able to say something, or to say what I feel, or to speak out my pain, or to ask for a break. So I feel that the message is the most important thing. It's the most powerful thing in conservation. Telling you a story, that story you tell to your family member tell it to somebody else, and before you know it, that story is gone. So the most powerful tool in conservation is a story. So I'm tasked to tell a story of an animal that can't speak for itself. It's a big job, but it's a job that must be done if they're going to be surviving for the rest of our lifetime and the next generation to enjoy.
Thank you, Jamal. And I'm gonna borrow your words, Jamal, your words, Sandy, where we see that the most powerful aspect of conservation is telling the story, and especially for those species that cannot speak for themselves, and making sure that we do not leave people behind. This brings me to my last question, because I have to really pay attention to our audience as well. And we will give it a quick shot so that we dive into those questions from our audience. What do you want your conservation legacy to be? And I'll start with Caroline.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nelly. So I'd say, first of all, just looking at it from the conservation perspective is the aspect of, for us to have, for conservation to be successful, so we have to have the communities involved in conservation. So I think it resonates to what Jamal and Tandiwa have said. So being that part of the positive change and being that particular voice for the species, and especially for women representation in conservation, I think that would be one of the things that would be really important. Like just to sum it up, it's looking at it, for example, looking at African conservation in the African perspective. We have seen like we have a profound imbalance in the current leadership. So I want to be that part of sitting of the table and formulating strategies and of course policies that help towards conservation of the large carnivores. Yeah.
Great. Hello, everybody. Sorry about that, Nelly, but this is probably a good time to start questions. Thank you to all of you, Tandiwe, Caroline, and Jamal, for sharing your important work with us. So let me start with the questions that you submitted from the Google form, and I'll try to get to as many as I can. Let me start with, this is from Linda to all our participants. What are some upcoming projects you're most excited about?
For me, it's preparing for.
I can. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I think for me, this year, hoping that the COVID-19 situation in the country doesn't fall apart completely. We want to do a lot more of our work that looks at promoting coexistence between people and large carnivores. So we've been primarily a wildlife research organization, but as time goes, we're seeing that in order to protect the future for carnivores and for people, we need to look at how do we make the cost of living with wildlife a bit easier on communities around South Luangwa National Park. And so we've begun work that is aimed at reducing human-lion conflict. And so we hope to continue that by doing different activities that can, limit livestock losses, but then also promote local support for the conservation of these species.
For me, it's basically preparing for the start of tourism as things start to go back to normal. Trying our best to put measures in place to address the issues, to try and ameliorate the potential threat before they even become a threat. I think COVID-19 has brought us a rare opportunity to hit the reset button. So we're able to get ahead of these people, get ahead of tourism, get ahead of the world starting up by putting measures in place to try and alleviate any potential threats, whether it's increasing patrols, whether it's installing signs in areas of concern, whether it's informing and sharing knowledge with the tourism sector so that they're prepared to do this the right way at this time around. But I feel like it's an opportunity for us to really start over, to put measures ahead before the impacts actually starts again.
Yeah, so for us, I think it's more of thinking outside the box and rethinking conservation and applying nature-based solution to conservation problems and using the community knowledge and perspective in terms of contributing to those particular problems. So we are looking into addressing the aspects of human-wildlife conflict, but going deep into the communities and trying to work together and synergize our efforts and coming up with mitigation strategies that work within the various systems. So I'm really excited that at least building onto those already existing concepts and of course learning from best practices in other areas in terms of promoting that positive coexistence and also identifying positive pathways of coexistence between wildlife, people, and the beautiful environment that they exist in.
Thank you all. You're so committed. You can really tell, and thank you again. I have a question from Daniel. What advice would you give to young conservationists?
For me, they have an opportunity to start early. I started at 11. That doesn't mean you get to start at 11. You can start sooner. The sooner you start, the more you'll be able to do, the farther you'll be able to reach, the more you'll be able to accomplish. Like I said, conservation is not for scientists and researchers. It's for everybody, no matter your age, no matter your sex, no matter your gender, no matter your religion or ethnicity. It's for every single person on this planet. And my advice is to start now. Don't wait until tomorrow. Don't wait until next week. Don't wait until you secure your master's degree. Don't wait until you've gone through school. Start now. Conservation needs to start now. We need every single person to be a part of it. Often people are confused in what they want to say or what to do. Don't let that hinder you. I believe that when everybody has a story, everybody has a path that they will end up on eventually. Most people may not know that path as yet, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to figure it out. But being a part of conservation is not always just writing a check or sending money in the mail. It's volunteering, whether it's a small cleanup in your community, whether it's sharing a post or sending a message of thank you for an organization that is doing great work around the world. But my advice is mainly for them to start now. Get involved, get on the ground, and do as best as they can to learn, to get the hands-on experience, and to be open to opportunities, and to try as best as they could to share whatever they themselves learn as well.
So I'd say also for me, I think.
Go ahead, Doctor.
It's okay. So for me, I'd say where it all begins, they say every dream begins with a dreamer. So having that persistence and passion on what you really believe in, I think it's what drives everybody, and believing in yourself. I think that is really what really has spearheaded and pushed me to where I am. And in terms of just having that particular passion and that particular drive, and of course, networking with like-minded individuals and trying out various things and getting that exposure. I think once you get that exposure, you really zero in onto that thing that you really like in terms of, because when you speak about conservation, it's really diverse, and there are various areas that you can contribute in terms of just conservation. Tandiwe.
I think everything the doctor and Jamal said, and then what I would add is also, I think if you want to work in conservation, it's very important to have a positive attitude. The field itself is very crisis-driven. You see a lot of negative stories about how everything is falling to pieces and how everything is going wrong. So it's really important to have that mindset that what you're doing makes a difference. There's small victories to celebrate along the way, and these small victories go on translate into a big impact. And it's really important to think of nature not just as this fragile entity that can be completely destroyed by our activities, but also think of it as a very resilient being or entity that responds to every small action that we take to support recovery of ecosystems or species. And then you have the staying power to work in this field. It's very easily, I think there's a term for it, ecological or something, I can't remember. It's very easy to feel discouraged and think and just get depressed and say, there's so much going wrong. The problems are too big. There's nothing really that I can do as an individual that can make a difference. But, I've been very fortunate to see ecosystems recover and respond to conservation actions within, 2-3 years. And just that positive outlook on things has, kept me going. So yeah, anybody that wants to join the field should be looking at the positive side of things and not just be bogged down by the doom and gloom that we see in the press and then everywhere around us.
Thank you. This is going to be our last question, and it's for Nelly. I understand you're back. It's not fair for me to ask you to be brief with this answer, but what is your future hope and plan for the EFN program?
Thank you. And before I answer, I mean, in this virtual world of doing things, we just learned that technology cannot be on our side. And so for a minute, I couldn't hear anyone, but thanks for driving the vehicle and thanks to the panelists for continuing to do this. Now, to answer this question, in short, I really would like to see the vision of Ras and Island Train continuing to live on. And now to break it down just in brief, the plan is to continue scaling the capacity development efforts, which includes supporting our extensive alumni networks to keep doing this work. The next thing is to look at gaining buy-in from multidisciplinary sectors. We cannot exist on our own, in our own silos. We need everyone to be on the board. And the last one is to support local efforts. As you've seen from our three panelists, I can't have enough of just saying what they've been able to do. And when I say I did my homework, I didn't do enough to just read about their amazing contribution. And so supporting local efforts, which includes aligning our global conservation agendas with local priorities so that we can continue to place ownership, stewardship of natural resources in the hands of people that live and interact with wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you all. This is such a great discussion, and I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. And thank you for the great questions. And speaking of thanks, I want to thank all of our Legacy Circle members. We at WWF want you to know that you are very much appreciated. One of my favorite quotes is this: "The true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit." I find that such a lovely thought. This quote sums up for me the selflessness, the community mindedness, and the passion for nature that you possess. Leaving a legacy with WWF is such a thoughtful act and one that we do not take lightly. We want you to know that. Now, if you had any questions that did not get answered today about the program or legacy giving in general, I invite you to call us or to email us at legacygifts@wwfus.org. And the last thing is, please, if you have not already, please opt into receiving our emails. That way you'll get invitations to the regular virtual event series called the Insider Series, and you'll be ready to get another one of our invitations when we do another Fireside Chat. So thank you again for joining us. Have a great summer, everyone. Bye-bye.